Welcome to those who are new to the group, to Community Shares and CORE, and of course to our longstanding friends and member group representatives as well. My name is Sherry Dubiel, and I am the Executive Director at Community Shares of Wisconsin. We are a statewide fundraising federation that represents 70 nonprofits working for social and environmental justice. You can learn more about Community Shares at communityshares.com. Today's session is a collaboration with our friends at CORE. Through funding and relationships, CORE spreads and deepens core practices for social transformation to heal individuals, communities, and the world. Julie Anderson and Becca Krantz are joining us from CORE today. You can learn more about CORE at corechange.us. Our two organizations come together today to bring this session to help you learn more about the Rights of Nature movement. The Rights of Nature movement reflects a growing understanding that nature deserves our respect, protection, and legal rights. It is a fundamental shift in humankind's relationship with nature, from one of use and exploitation to one of care and protection. Rights of nature laws secure legal rights of the environment, including species and ecosystems. In a country where corporations are given legal personhood and constitutional rights, it is not a radical idea to grant the same rights to our natural world. Before we introduce our speakers, we take a moment to acknowledge that our community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will and enslaved. Some left their distant homes in hope of a better life. Some were pushed out of their homelands by extractive policies, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Although we may live in different locations, many of us are in South Central Wisconsin on the ancestral lands of the Ho-Chunk people. We pay respect to their generations, past and present. And now we're going to introduce our speakers, and they will continue the presentation up until we'll have some time left for questions and answers. At the point, as I mentioned earlier, when we start the question and answer session, we will end the recording. But up until then, we'll be recording our speakers. And so I'm happy to introduce to you first, Anaquette Guy Ryder, who is a traditional Menominee who resides on the Menominee Reservation in northern Wisconsin. Anaquette is the executive director of a Menominee Indian community organization called Menakanakim, and a member of the Menominee Constitutional Task Force. He's also a community organizer, an activist, author, amateur archaeologist, and a lecturer. And we also welcome Mari Margill, who is the executive director of the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights. She works with national, state, and local governments, civil society, tribal nations, and indigenous communities in the United States, Ecuador, Australia, the Philippines, Nepal, and elsewhere to advance the Rights of Nature framework. Anaquette and Mari, we welcome you. Thank you for taking time to share more about the Rights of Nature movement, and we invite you to take it away.
Yeah, well, Lennon, so Anaquette nitakam wapashia nitotem kashitna and iskiwakian. My wanan mauni wake osaitua. My I just kind of introduced you in myself in our language. We're kind of taught by our elders to use our beautiful language when introducing ourselves, so we can let people know not only where we're coming from, but also you know, I spoke of my clan and of all those ones that are out there that are of my clan. My brothers and sisters will understand and know who I am. The other thing I did say in there is my name is Anaquette. You know, there's a lot of translations for that name, or at least in my head there is, and like the main translation I go with is it translates to brilliant, genius, unbelievably handsome, all those things. So, but if you look it up though, it does translate to cloudy skies, but I think that's debatable. So I welcome you guys all here today. We're going to speak a little bit here about rights of nature, not only just what it is, and a little bit I want to talk to you guys about some of the things that we've done here on the Menominee Reservation. Mari, did you have anything right away, or no? Okay. So first and foremost, this concept of rights of nature, is nothing new, even though it is new, but it's a very old concept. It's been around a long time. Our people have been living this sort of lifestyle for many, many generations. The hard part, I think, sometimes when we talk about rights of nature, people try to view it through like a Western framework, or you're seeing it through the eyes of your language. But I would ask you guys, just right now, as we kind of start this time together, that we slow down maybe a bit, and we remember how important our earth is, and how important these waters in this air is. I would even challenge you to feel the earth underneath your feet, even though you have a pair of shoes on, or maybe you don't have a pair of shoes on, but whatever that is, to make sure that you're connecting with our earth, and you're taking this time now to try to hear our words in a good way. I always like to kind of start that way, because I know that obviously it's lunchtime, and I could kind of sort of hear thunder, but it's probably everybody's bellies are hungry. So I would encourage, if you wanted to eat, to definitely do that. You could go off camera and eat lunch. I understand that's the time. But kind of getting back a little bit to the rights of nature, the concept is very simple. I mean, it's right in the words, right? The rights of nature, of understanding and looking at our environment as not something that like we have dominion over, but more so of that we are in line with it, that we are a part of it. Fortunately for us, here on the reservation in Menominee here, we still have a lot of cultural context to help us in our journeys. And the way we see this environment is more about like seeing our relatives. These trees, for us, have stories. One of the great things that our culture has about the connection with the trees, is that if we were to lose everything, and if I would go to a tree and it would cut that tree in half, and I turned it on its side, and you've seen those rings in there, I could retell our creation story with just that tree. That's one of those gifts of those trees, is that they keep our origin story within them. So they're very, very important to us. And the other thing I would just talk about a little bit is this understanding of our environment. We've been told that if we want to rebuild our community, we just have to look no further than a forest, and try to understand how all those diverse species can interact like that and live together, and where life flourishes. Of course, there's always some things that happen because of nature, but that's the way things are, and the way they go. So rights of nature for me, is something that is rooted in our understanding of connection with the earth, of our connection not only with the earth, but with all the things that are on it, and that includes our people too. We have a word in our language they use as Natanawe Makanak, and that word is such a beautiful word, because it encompasses all things here. It doesn't just specify certain things, but it says everything is my relative, and everything is a part of me. And I really like that word. But the rights of nature, Mari will talk a bit about like kind of just the basics of what it is, you know, and the give you the 1.0 version of it. But I kind of wanted to just make sure you guys understand that like where this is coming from, the rights of nature and what it's rooted in, you know, and if you look at the way that our world is nowadays, everything seems to be instantaneously, you know, everything seems to be that it's going to happen, you know, very quickly. But you know, if we look to our original teacher, our Mother Earth, we'll see that we should slow down. We should see that things always change. It's very shocking to me when people have such a hard time with change. It's like if you look around, everything changes. Nothing is permanent. You know, it always is always that way. You think we would be more adapt to it, but it doesn't seem that way. It seems like people get fearful and they panic. There's many instances, you know, within our reservation. You know, our reservation is a 95%. I would say about 90 to 95% woodland. So it's never been developed, and it's what some people say is what Wisconsin looked like prior to Europeans coming here. So if you guys ever get a chance, please stop up here on our reservation. You can stop here by us, Minneconaughey, and come check out our farm and those things. But the reason why I bring that up is that word, you know, Wisconsin. That word in our language is Wiaskosin, and if you were to translate that word in a way, it means like everything here is good. You know, all the everything from the waters to the air to the land to and it's a really encompassing word, and it's such a fitting word for our state here that we live in, because it's so very beautiful and it has diverse ecosystems. So the rights of nature, like I said, is something that, you know, the tribes are starting to really think about, really starting to like, how do we craft certain laws in the way we see things, not only just through our own worldview, but, you know, on our governing documents that we use. You know, our people here on this reservation, you know, we used to use what was called a clan system to govern ourselves. And it's interesting because the clan system, each clan served a specific purpose, but they all had to agree on something if we were going to do something, whatever that be. We have 34 clans total here on the reservation, but 5 principal clans. The reason, you know, I bring that up is like, you know, it's possible for us to be a group of people and agree on something and make sure that, like, as we move and as we do things, that we're all included and that we can do it in a good way. There's been times up here, you know, where I've heard some of our elders talk about rights of nature, even though they don't even, at them times, they didn't even exist or really didn't even know nothing about it. I remember my grandmother, when I was very young, she would say to me, when we'd be out in the woods, she'd say, if we were picking medicines or whatever we were doing, she'd say, no, don't take too much. She said, just take what you need and leave the rest, you know, for the others, for somebody else that might need it. And, you know, to me, that is rights of nature, you know, the way she framed that and the way she understood it. You know, I would encourage all of you listeners here today that you know, you take some time today to really think about this beautiful water that we have here in the state. You know, we're fortunate to live next to these Great Lakes and have all this water, but there's a lot of places that don't, and you know, we use that water every day. You know, it's, I don't know how anybody could disagree with water is life, because it definitely is. But I would encourage that you guys at least acknowledge that water today at some point, you know, and make sure that you can slow down a bit and put yourself in this beautiful creation that we live in. rights of nature is like within my DNA, and there is a lot of connections that I could draw to it. I'm sure all of you too, could draw those same connections. I don't think that there's anybody on this call that would say, well, oh, I hate nature. I don't like being out there. Maybe there are, but I'm sure that when things get stressful and times get tough, if you just go take a walk outside, can really, really change your mind and change your identity, or not your identity, but change the way you think about things. So, I'm really honored to be able to talk here a bit about rights of nature. Here at home, one of the things that we did with rights of nature, like getting it into our governmental documents, is we actually passed a resolution here on our reservation back in 2020. And that resolution stated that we wanted to protect and people to understand the importance of the Menominee River to us. And the Menominee River, for what you don't know, it creates the natural border between Upper Michigan and Wisconsin. They call it the Menominee River because of us. That's where our oral history states that we come from as a people. They were trying, and still are trying, to put a mine on the banks of that river. And it's hard sometimes to let people understand like how deeply connected you are to a place when you've only been there, a couple generations or whatnot. So we were trying to take our framework and our way that we see things, and we see our beautiful river. It's like the center of our universe, really. And we put that into a resolution form, and that was kind of just a step one into a next step. And the next step for us would be we want to do a constitutional amendment. For you that don't know about us Menominee Indians, is we are the only reservation on in the state of Wisconsin that's a closed reservation. So which basically means that the state doesn't have any jurisdiction over us at all. So we write our own, government documents, and we have our own schools, we have our clinic, we have our own judicial system, we have our own police force, all those kind of things. So we're slowly going to be working our way into our constitution amendment. The other thing is for you that don't know who we are as Menominee, we were terminated back in 1953. We regained status in 1973, and some of those folks that led that fight for us to be restored are still alive. But when you start talking about changing the Constitution, of course, their ears perk up and people get a little bit nervous about what that could be. So, we want to make sure that people understand, how important this rights of nature is, that we can use it as a tool. Tribes, as being sovereign, can exercise their sovereignty by putting these things into our documents, and we want to make sure that the tribes understand that, like, they've been leading. We're the original environmentalists of this land, and we've been leading in this effort. They just don't know it entirely yet, and we want to make sure that we can get them to understand that it's not about copying anybody, or it's not about doing something that's been done before, but it's like, no, let's use what they don't know about us, and that's our story, and that's our identity. We can use our own culture to draft laws that reflect our worldview. So again, I just thanks for everybody being here. I'm gonna pass this over to my colleague Mari, so she can kind of give you guys an idea, some practical ideas about rights of nature. And thank you for your time. Oh.
Thank you, Guy. And I want to thank Sherry and Julie and CORE and the Community Shares of Wisconsin for inviting us. We're really, really happy to be here. And Guy and I do quite a bit of work together, and it's really nice to be able to be here with him today. So my job is sort of to be sort of nuts and bolts, if you will, about rights of nature. So sort of rights of nature 101. And just to say this, we're trying to just give everybody a sense of what this is. And of course, there's lots more to share and to learn and read. And so we're happy to direct people to those resources if people want to learn more. So just as Guy said at the beginning, the very basic idea here is the rights of nature means recognizing, securing, protecting legal rights of the natural world. So nature as a whole, or an ecosystem such as the Menominee River, or even a species. So it's a real transformation. It may not sound like much when I say it's just this recognition of rights, but it's actually a real transformation in how nature today is treated under our legal systems, under law, and how we govern ourselves toward the natural world today. So under most legal systems around the world today, nature, ecosystem, species, the water, water, air, all of that is treated as a thing. It's treated as property. It's treated as an item of commerce. It's treated as being without rights, legal rights, including even the most basic right to even exist, which is why our environmental laws, laws at the national level, like a Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, laws that we have in the state of Wisconsin and states all over this country. These are environmental regulatory laws, and they're very much mirrored in countries around the world. And what these laws do is they regulate how we humans can use or exploit nature. Nature is this thing, it's sitting there for our use, it's the perspective of these laws. And so, Clean Air Act laws, the language sounds good, clean air, that's obviously important. But what it actually does under that law is issue permits to corporations, to companies, to utilities to be able to use the atmosphere. What does that mean? It means that they're given permits to pollute. And companies are given permits to pollute a lake or a river or something to offset their waste. When we think about fracking, which has taken place all over the United States and in countries around the world, when a company, oil and gas company, gets a permit from government, from the state government, from the federal government to conduct fracking, they're getting a permit to use nature. So that, just in very practical terms, what that means is that for every frack well, millions of gallons of fresh water are used. They're getting to use water and to contaminate that water. They're being issued a permit to use the ground and the subsurface and to drill and cause explosions. They're given permits to drill through aquifers. They're given permits to dump their frack waste somewhere else. So these are all about using the air to pollute, using the water to contaminate and conduct fracking, using the ground and the subsurface to get at oil and gas. So this is just one example, but you can apply it to any kind of other industrial activity. And another one that's just so stark is mountaintop removal mining. Well, that takes place often in Appalachia, like West Virginia, and other states. Under environmental laws, mining companies are given legal permits to blow the tops off of mountains to mine coal. And what happens when you blow the tops off a mountain? Well, the debris falls down the sides of the mountain. So they're given permits in addition to cover up and destroy streams and rivers and wetlands that are getting all of that blown up waste. So just as the reason they're able to do this is they're being legally authorized to do it, and they're legally authorized under our environmental laws. And our environmental laws are based in this idea that nature is there for our use and exploitation. So it makes sense that that is what environmental laws would do, regulate our use of nature. And of course, the consequences of that, all of us are experiencing. I live in Washington State, and we now have a fire season, which we didn't have just a few years ago. We see climate change accelerating. We see species extinction accelerating. We see ecosystems collapsing like coral reefs. So all of these environmental laws under a legal system that treats nature as existing for human use, the consequence, of course, despite having thousands of environmental laws that we think should protect us, is that we're actually legalizing environmental harm and destruction. And we're sitting with those impacts today. And the work of the rights of nature has looked at existing legal frameworks and how we treat nature and govern ourselves toward nature, and determined that's not doing what we need it to do, i.e. we need to actually create a new environmental legal system that changes how we govern ourselves toward nature, the kinds of decisions we make toward nature, and necessarily transforming how nature itself is treated under the law, to recognize that nature possesses legal rights. And we have, of course, other movements that have kind of gone through a similar portal before, which is to say the abolitionist movement and the suffrage movement, for instance, looked at recognizing rights of enslaved people, transforming them from being treated as property, much like nature is treated today, and a movement to transform how they are treated to be recognized as rights-bearing people and with rights and protections, and that they're not to be owned by others. Similarly, women were treated as property of their husbands or their brothers or their fathers without legal rights and couldn't do most anything. And the women's movement transformed how women were treated under the law from a literally property to become rights-bearing people with protections under the law that they could exercise and enforce. Nature sits in this property place today in most places in the world. And the rights of nature movement is seeking to transform that. And that's a legal transformation, of course, but it also is a cultural transformation. And Guy spoke, I think, quite a bit to this, which is other movements have, people's movements have fought for rights, for protections, and they had to change, yes, they had to change law, but they also had to change, how we think and feel about this thing, so that society itself had to transform in order for the legal changes to be made. Similarly, with the nature's recognizing rights of nature, we see that similar need to transform how we think and feel about nature, how we consider ourselves toward nature. And part of what Guy's presentation, I think, is so important for us to sort of feel and help us to think about nature differently is the understanding that we are part of nature. And as he said, Indigenous peoples, I think, are really leading this movement because their cultural relationship with the natural world, with Mother Earth, is, ancient, longstanding, and how they live upon the earth is similarly, in keeping, in harmony with the natural world. That's really what this work is about, is how do we transform humankind's activity to live in harmony with the natural world? Because today it is disharmonious, is I think the best way to put that. And so what we have seen is in the past 15 years, the first rights of nature law anywhere in the world was in a small community in the state of Pennsylvania. My co-founder of the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights worked with the people of Tamaqua Borough in Pennsylvania to write the world's first rights of nature law. 2 years later, in 2008, we were invited to Ecuador as they were writing a new constitution, and Ecuador became the first country in the world to enshrine the rights of nature, or Pachamama, within a national constitutional framework, rights being the highest form of legal protection that we have, and they secured that in their national constitution. And one of the things that I think kind of embodies what Ecuador did is they have this concept of summa causai, and that means good living. And they've enshrined that into this 2008 constitution. And it's a way of, summa causai is a way of living in harmony with the natural world. It's a very much built from their indigenous cultures within Ecuador. And summa causai means living in harmony with community of people, with ourselves, and very importantly, with nature. And that's been enshrined within Ecuador's constitution, and rights of nature is part of that. Since 2008, we now have several countries, Uganda, Bolivia, Panama, have put the rights of nature into national law. We have local communities across the United States, about 36 now, that have enshrined the rights of nature into local law. We have efforts at the state level, like in Florida, to advance a rights of nature constitutional amendment. In Canada, the Inuit First Nation, alongside a non-Indigenous nation, recognized rights of the Magpie River in Quebec last year. There are communities in Brazil that have passed rights of nature laws. In Australia and Northern Ireland have passed rights of nature policies. We have courts in places like Colombia that have recognized within their constitutional court, recognized rights of the Atrato River. The Supreme Court there, rights of the Amazon region within Colombia. In Bangladesh, the Supreme Court recognized rights of all rivers. In India, you've had multiple state courts now recognize rights of the Ganges, of the Yamuna, and other rivers and ecosystems, and all of Mother Nature, actually, in a case that was released just a few days ago. And so you see this growing move to advance laws at the local level, state level, national levels, court rulings, and of course, First Nations, tribal nations have advanced laws as well. So Guy spoke to the Menominee's policy recognizing rights of the Menominee River. And the Ho-Chunk have also taken steps to recognize rights of nature within their legal framework. Next door in Minnesota, the White Earth, we work with them to recognize rights of Menomin or wild rice, which has incredibly important cultural significance as a staple food. So very important for them as people, recognizing rights of wild rice, with the first law to recognize rights of a plant species anywhere. The Yurok in Northern California have recognized rights of the Klamath River, and several other tribal nations have taken these steps as well. And I wanted to just share some very recent developments, which I think are particularly potentially important to folks on this call. With the White Earth, because it's such a close neighbor for you, they recognized rights of Menomin or wild rice in 2018. Last year, the rice itself, Menomin itself, became a plaintiff in a case in tribal court brought by the wild rice as well as tribal members to the White Earth Tribal Court against the state of Minnesota to stop the state of Minnesota's permit to Enbridge for its Line 3 construction and operation. The state issued a permit authorizing Enbridge to take 5 billion gallons of fresh water to build Line 3 and to conduct operations. Menomin wild rice depends on freshwater and freshwater habitat. And we are already seeing the impacts from the Line 3 taking of that water on Menomin. And so they've brought a case within tribal court, the very first case to seek to enforce the rights of nature within a court. So that's a really important development, and that's ongoing. You have a community in Florida, Orange County, where Orlando, Walt Disney World is. They recognized rights of waterways back in 2020. And last year, they brought a case, the very first case in the United States, to seek to enforce the rights of nature under an existing legal framework, which they have now in their county, to stop a development that will fill, that's the word we use in our environmental laws, to fill a wetland, to set up a commercial development, to build a development. Well, filling means killing, destroying a wetland. By filling it in, it no longer exists. So they're bringing a case, the waterways themselves as the plaintiff, bringing this case to enforce their rights, even their most basic right of all to exist, which they cannot do if the waterway is filled in. So these are some developments that are occurring, and it's just a lot is happening. And I think what's really interesting is the efforts that Guy described about seeking to make changes to tribal constitutional frameworks, tribal laws and policies. That work is very much growing. And just one last thing I wanted to say is that Guy and I helped the Midwest Alliance of Sovereign Tribes very recently. They were interested in the rights of nature, and they put together a resolution which they adopted back in March. And I just to give you a taste of what they were talking about when they talk about protecting and supporting rights of nature. Just quickly, I just wanted to read one clause that they included in this, and they say the rights of nature exist prior to human beings and are exhibited in the vast interconnected web of life existing in the physical and spiritual world. According to our creation stories, we are the most recently arrived beings within this vast creation. We learn and are guided by these elements of nature that were here before us. It is our duty and responsibility to respect and protect all of creation and the elder beings and elements with whom we share this world. And they go on to talk about Mother Earth as a relative and a provider that we must respect and protect. And as part of that is protecting the rights of nature. I thought that captured this idea, this ancient idea that for many is very new. I thought it captured it really quite well. So I wanted to share that with you. Thank you.